Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be using the Honey Bunny Boo stamp set by Heffy Doodle. And I'm going to be creating a one-layer card here, but I'm going to be creating not a scene, but actually 3 little mini scenes. So I'm going to start off with my T-square ruler and a pencil, and I'm just basically doing some measurements at this point before I go in with a pen. I don't trust myself as far as measurements go, so I always draw everything out with a pencil before going over it with a pen or a Copic safe pen. So what my plan is to create 3 squares towards the top of the panel and then a rectangle towards the bottom, and that'll be for my sentiment. The 3 little squares on top will be for my 3 little mini scenes. Once I was happy with the placement and the size of everything, I'm going to go in with the EK Success journaling pen, which is a Copic safe pen, and go over those pencil lines. You'll just want to make sure that a lot of the Copic safe pens, especially these ones, may smear. So I always work away from me and then towards me, just because if I run my ruler over those same areas that I just went over, sometimes my ink will smear. So just keep that in mind. Once I had everything outlined, I'll go ahead and erase my pencil lines and we'll move on to the stamping. I have all of my masks pre-cut with Simon Says Stamp masking paper. So I'm just using those masks to kind of place into my little squares to see what's going to fit in what images will go with which bunny. I knew I wanted one bunny in each one of the squares. There's some carrots and some Easter eggs in the stamp set. So it's kind of just playing with the placement. And to be honest with you, once I began stamping, I changed this anyway, but this was just to give myself an idea. So because the bunnies are actually bigger than my little squares, I'm taking some Post-it note tape and masking out either side of my little square. And I'll start by stamping my first little bunny here. And I'm going to be stamping him with blackout ink by Ink on 3 because this is a Copic safe ink. And then I'll mask the bunny out with the Simon Says Stamp masking paper and then stamp my little Easter eggs. Now you'll see that I didn't line up my mask perfectly the first time. The ears on the bunny weren't lining up right. Little tip for masking: when you need the mask to be perfect, which I thought I needed it to be perfect because my initial plan was to do ink blending, but I didn't end up doing that, is to pick the most intricate area of the image and line up your mask there first, and then the rest should pretty much fall into place. So I went ahead and masked out the bunny, then I stamped the little Easter eggs and masked those out as well. I didn't actually need to do that because, like I said, I didn't end up doing any ink blending. We'll move on to the next square, and I'm going to speed this up just a little bit because I'm pretty much doing the same thing. I'm going to stamp out my bunny and realize that his ears were going to kind of hang off the top. So I ended up having to mask the top portion of the square as well. Masked him out, and then I stamped out the little carrots. Now there's 3 carrots in the stamp set. I had pre-cut a mask for the larger carrot, I believe, and then I ended up stamping the smaller carrot, so it didn't line up at all. But then there's another carrot that has like a bite taken out of it, and that actually lined up enough where I could stamp my second carrot and not have my lines overlapping. So I just used that because I was being lazy and didn't want to cut another mask. So moving on to this final square, I had to mask out the top portion of this one as well. Stamped out my bunny. Then the small Easter egg, masked that out, and then stamped the larger Easter egg so that would appear to be behind it. Now, the masking paper that I'm using has that backing to it, and obviously I didn't peel all of it up on this one, but that's why I like it. That's another reason why I like this masking paper, because it's easier to cut. When you're working with Eclipse masking paper or Post-it notes, you have to deal with the sticky being on one side, and sometimes it can be hard to kind of twist and turn your paper as you're cutting the mask. So that being this has the backing, you don't have to worry about that. So once everything was all stamped out, I'm going to remove the Post-it note tape and remove all of my masks, because at this point I decided I'm not going to mask out each and every one of these little squares. So I'm not going to do any ink blending. But for the sentiment in the bottom rectangle, I'm going to go ahead and use the Hoppy Easter from the stamp set and stamp that with Wisteria ink by Simon Says Stamp. Not sure how to pronounce that. And then realized the sentiment kind of got lost in that big, huge rectangle. I had a whole lot of space to fill up. So I ended up stamping that larger Easter egg, the one with the polka dots, twice, one on either side, and I'll just go ahead and Copic color that, hopefully to match the sentiment, the color of the sentiment a little bit. So I had a little smudge there that I fixed with a sand eraser, and then we'll jump right into the Copic coloring. Going to show you this first bunny here in real time. I want the bunnies to appear white. So I'm using my C5 for my shading, and I'm only putting this very sparingly in the very darkest areas. So where his head would be turned to one side, on the base of his ear in the back, and where his one paw is kind of hanging over the other. Blending all of those areas out a little bit with the C3 and starting a little bit of the flicking in the larger areas like his body and his face. Going to flick those areas out even further with the C1 and extend the shadows on the ears and paws. And then I'll go in with a colorless blender, and I'm going to flick in the opposite direction. And this is just to get rid of those flick lines to make it more of a smoother blend. And right now he definitely looks like a gray bunny, but once everything else is colored, especially our background, he won't look so gray anymore. I'm going to color the other two bunnies with the same color combination, but I'm just speeding it up a little bit because I pretty much did the same thing, just added shading in different areas. But I am using that C5 very, very sparingly. And the rest of the Copic coloring on this card is very, very simple. We're going to stick to pretty much pastel colors, using a lot of the purple because I want that to match the sentiment. But we're pretty much going to stick to 3 color blends for the most part. And we're going to keep it really simple, including the background of these little squares. No shading at all. So next I'm going to bring out the first purple combination with some V markers, and I'm going to go right in with my lightest color to saturate the paper a little bit. For the Easter eggs, these are round objects, so you just have to keep in mind that any round object is going to have a highlight in the center, because if you're looking at something round straight on, the center would be the closest to you because it would be bowed out. So even the little star that's in that one Easter egg there, I'm still doing my shading on either side because the center of that star is the center of the Easter egg, which would be closest to me, which would have that highlight. So I'm going to move on to a different purple combination for the polka dots on this larger Easter egg here, and realize that this combination was not all that far off from the first combination that I used, so I didn't continue using this on anything else. But I am doing the shading on the polka dots the same way. So if a polka dot is off to the right-hand side more, it's going to have a little bit more shading on the right-hand side. If it's in the middle, it's going to have shading on both sides, if that makes sense. So I'm going to bring out a few more color combinations here, some pinks and some RV markers, just to add a little bit more color and not everything be so purple. But all pastel colors. If you watched my previous video, a lot of these same color combinations I used as well, because it is hard to get a pastel look with Copic markers and still get the contrast you're looking for. You're not going to get as much contrast with pastel colors. So what I typically do is once I have all of my blending down for that particular image, you'll see, especially for this color combination, my R22 is my lightest color. Once I get back to that R01, I'm going to add a little bit more of that R22 to either side and not blend it out. But I am flicking it out so that it kind of blends on its own. As the paper becomes saturated, these colors will automatically start blending without having to go back over them. It's subtle and you may not notice it immediately, but give it a minute or so and you'll see that the colors will begin to blend. So moving on to an RV combination, just for a few of these details, the stripe on this one Easter egg and this Easter egg that's kind of laying on its side. Still would have shading on either side though, because again, it is a round object. You'll see here that I do go back in with my darkest color again, just to add a little bit more contrast on either side of those Easter eggs. Finally going to bring in a yellow combination for this final Easter egg. And you're not going to get all that much contrast with yellows and still be able to keep it a pastel color. Typically, I do my shading with a yellow with like an orange marker or even an E marker. But being I wanted to keep it pastel, I just dealt with the fact that I just wasn't going to get a whole lot of contrast. For the little carrots here, I'm going to obviously use some YR markers. Going to do my shading on either side of these as well, because these would be more of a rounder object. Also creating just a little bit of a shadow where that one carrot is laying underneath the other. And for the leaves, would it be the leaves of a carrot? Well, whatever they are. I'm going to use a YG marker and 2G markers. So I'm going to cover up the entire thing with the YG marker, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading where the leaves kind of dip in, if that makes sense. I'm going to create that little V and just go with the shape of the image. Blend that out a little bit with the G3, and then finally going back over the entire thing with the YG03. So once all of my images for my little scenes were colored, I'm going to add my sky and my grass. So I'm just going to go in solid with my B00 and my cap tipped over, but it is a B00. And I'm just filling in my sky area. I'm just going to leave a little bit on the bottom of each one of my little squares for my green, for my grass. And this is just going to give it a background. It's not going to have any detail to it at all. Going to go in with a YG marker. And is this a YG marker? I can't even tell. I think so. I can't see it on my end as I'm doing my voiceover. And I'm just going to add a little bit of ground to the bottom portion of my little squares, not adding any shadows or anything. Just want to keep background very, very basic. So next I'm going to color in these, I guess I'll call them the main Easter eggs. And I am going to do a 4-color blend on these. Because these are all by themselves, it's going to be more noticeable if they don't have as much contrast. So I am doing 4 colors here. And again, just concentrating the darkest areas being on either side. I just brought in the V17 as the darkest color, where I skipped the V17 on the top portion or on the little scenes that we had going on there. So again, just filling in that highlight color for the center, and I'm going directly over these little polka dots. I'm going to go in with my white gel pen to just fill in those little polka dots solid. Now you want to kind of move quickly when it comes to your white gel pen and filling in a larger area like this, because it stays wet, but it will start to dry almost immediately in certain areas. So you don't want to go over the same area too many times, because you'll end up picking up some of that ink that you have already laid down. I'm also going to take my white gel pen to add a few details to some of the Easter eggs on the top. I'm going to add some polka dots to some of the areas, and I'll also add some reflections to the Easter eggs as well as the carrots. If you notice that you're dabbing down your gel pen and it's creating more of a C or a moon shape than a dot, just rub it on your finger and get that ink flowing, and then you shouldn't have a problem. So once all of my coloring was done, it was looking way too plain for me. So I'm going to create a frame. around each one of my squares and my rectangle. And I'm not measuring here. I'm being brave and just kind of eyeballing it and just kind of about the same distance for each and every one of them, going on either side and the top and the bottom. And I did like this a lot better. It added a little something extra. It's still a very clean and simple card, but it did add just enough. So I also did that same thing with that rectangle where my sentiment is too, and that kind of framed that in as well. And next I'm going to add some sparkle. So I'm going to add some sparkle to pretty much everything. And I noticed that when I added the sparkle to those bottom two eggs, my white gel pen was smearing. And I know I had given it plenty of time to dry, so I wasn't sure what was going on, but I did scribble off my Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen on a scrap piece of paper before going in on my other images. And then finally added some Dream Drops, and I'll link the color below because I can't think of it right now. But I just added a few on either side of the sentiment. But that is the card for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and have a great day.